So it means to be pacified of an inherently existent cause. Means there's no inherently existent cause. That's the word pacification. Peaceful also means free of. Peaceful meaning free of.
Understanding impermanence is that close to
Not realising impermanence, not understanding. Understanding. We all understand impermanence.
Realize impermanence is that close to realizing impermanence. And about that game.
Well,
I'm told that I still need to meditate about emptiness because I can still think that things exist inherently, and I don't understand how do I.
Exactly. So the reason I said it's that close, it depends how intuitive we are. Because we can realise impermanence and still really have sort of this idea that, you know, everything's flow, but there are things flowing. Whereas if we're really intuitive, we'll understand there's no thing, there's just flow. There's no things flowing. And that's emptiness. That's emptiness. And within this flow, as we're going to see later, we create meaningful things with our conceptual mind to understand the flow. But we now think there are things in the flow. There are things flowing. But actually there's no thing flowing. Because in the flow, we create the thing with our conceptual mind. And we need to do that because we need to understand flow. But we don't understand we're creating the things. We think there are things there flowing. And we can still have that if we realise impermanence. But if we're really intuitive, we can go beyond that. Okay, so if we go to the text again, it says here, furthermore, with respect to directly realising selfnesses. And so here, remember, selfnesses is equivalent with emptiness, because selflessness here means no self, and in Mahayana, no self means no inherently existent self. So that means emptiness. In other philosophical systems in Buddhism, selflessness and emptiness do not mean the same thing, but here they do. So where you see selflessness, it means emptiness. So furthermore, with respect to directly realising selflessness, or in other words, with respect to directly realising emptiness, it is necessary to meditate having first determined selflessness through hearing and contemplating. Also, meditation by way of merely shamatha alone, like some non-Buddhists, does not have the capacity to abandon the mental afflictions. So here we got a few things important. It says first we need to determine that through hearing and contemplating. So here we've got we can talk about there's a couple of presentations here that are useful. There's one called the Three Wisdoms. And that's what's being referred to here, that, you know, if we want to really meditate on this emptiness, first we need to hear some instructions about what emptiness is. We need to contemplate that, reflect on that to have a good understanding about emptiness, because this will give us the framework for meditation practice. So basically this is a lot to do with study. And often people coming into spiritual practice either like to do lots of study and don't meditate, or they just want to meditate and don't study. So both of those are not going to work, because if we just study, and we can study a lot about emptiness, we can actually, even if we become the smartest Buddhist scholar on the planet, we'd probably be very miserable. In fact, maybe more miserable, because we think we've got the answer, nothing's changed. So if we want change, we need to bring it into practice. But if we don't study and we just meditate, then we've got no framework for practice. We can sit down to meditate. One is we won't know how to do the practice. Secondly, if we have some sort of experience in practice, we won't know what that means. We won't know how to interpret it. I mean, we could be just hallucinating, we could be spacing out, we could be having a valid experience. We won't know because we don't have a framework, we don't understand. We won't be able to interpret that experience, so we can go completely astray in the practice. So we need all three. We need to have the framework, bring it into practice, and then we can move forward. And similar to that, there is another presentation of 3 stages of progress in the practice. And here I like the Tibetan words because they're very brief, very short. Go Nyam Tok. Go means intellectual. So that's, of course, referring to the first 2, hearing, contemplation, to get a good intellectual understanding of emptiness. And then, of course, we need to meditate. And when we meditate, the next step is then we start to bring that intellectual understanding into experience. And so that's Nyam. Nyam means taste or experience. And so then if we meditate on emptiness and we have a little taste or experience of emptiness in meditation, depending on how strong that is, that may still affect our mind a little bit after the meditation. Maybe for a few minutes, a few hours, maybe a few days, maybe a bit longer. And what you'll notice is during that period where that experience of emptiness is still affecting the mind a little bit, you'll notice you'll be more calm than normal, less mental afflictions, and if they arise, they tend to be a little bit weaker, and you'll feel a little bit closer and more connected with others. And then that'll wear off and back to normal. So what we want to do, of course, is we want to take that to the next stage of stabilising that experience. And so that is Tok, and that is realisation. And realisation is then a very stable, long-lasting experience of emptiness and meditation. For us to go from here to here, we need shamatha. Because anything less than shamatha, and shamatha of course is a level of concentration, this single point of concentration. So the shamatha practice is the practice to achieve that level of concentration. Anything less than that, our mind is not stable and clear and sharp enough to fully penetrate nature of reality. And so at best we'll have some experience which could be very strong and could last for some time, but it'll wear off. So if we want to move from here to here, then we need shamatha. So we often see sentence that says something like the root of samsara, which is this grasping to independent existence, is cut by the union of shamatha and vipassana observing emptiness. So if we really want to fully cut, we need shamatha and vipassana realising emptiness. So that's realisation. And then realisation also, as if we get time later, goes through quite a number of stages. So if we really want to unpack all of that in a lot of detail, we have this Mahayana path chart here, which if we get time tomorrow we'll have a look at. But this is sort of the short answer, and that's the extensive answer. So therefore, the last point, and then it's time to break for lunch, is also meditation by way of merely shamatha alone, like some non-Buddhists, does not have the capacity to abandon the mental afflictions. So what you will find is if you just do shamatha practice, regardless of whether you're focusing on the breath, the mind, or some other object, as you develop this much more calm, clear, focused mind, what you will find is that due to that training of the mind, actually mental afflictions, it's harder for them to come up because of that practice. And you could mistakenly think that you've, even if you reach a high level, that you've achieved liberation, because as long as you're in that very calm state of shamatha, very difficult for mental afflictions to arise. And in fact, at the time of the Buddha, there was a number of people at the time that thought that that was the way to liberation. You develop higher and higher levels of concentration, you can eliminate the mental afflictions. But actually, you can't eliminate them. All you're doing is, due to that state of mind, you're not giving the conditions for those mental afflictions to arise. So that's why he talks about non-Buddhists here, is that at the time of the Buddha, there was a lot of people felt that this shamatha practice was the way to liberation. But what the Buddha discovered was, at best, all that shamatha can do is temporarily sort of subdue the mental afflictions, make them dormant. But he's not getting rid of any mental afflictions, because the mental afflictions are coming from distorted view of reality. So therefore, if we want to achieve liberation, we need to add the wisdom. And so therefore, you find in all Buddhist traditions 3 core practices. The first, ethics, we saw in the preliminaries there, that the foundation way of making our life meaningful is ethics. Ethics in Sanskrit is shila. And of course here we're really talking about avoiding harmful behaviour. So that's the foundation. And then on that basis we engage in the concentration practice. Concentration in Sanskrit is samadhi. There are many levels of concentration we can develop. The one that we are focusing on here in this text is shamatha. Any of you who've had more experience with Theravada Buddhist traditions, when they talk about concentration practice, you probably never heard the word shamatha. Because in those traditions, when they talk about concentration practice, they're talking about a different level of concentration called the jhanas. So in Theravada Buddhist traditions, in Mahayana they say we're doing shamatha practice. Theravada traditions, they say we're doing jhana practice. Same practice. Same practice. And the third, of course, is the wisdom practice. In Sanskrit is prajna. And of course, often here, the wisdom practice is referred to as vipassana practice or vipassana practice. So what we can see here then is that if we want to achieve liberation, then, of course, ethical basis, then we engage in the concentration practice, the shamatha practice. And then on that basis, we engage in the vipassana practice. And particularly here, in the Mahayana, but specifically in Mahamudra, when we talk about vipassana practice, we're not simply talking about realizing emptiness, we're really talking about realizing the emptiness of the mind, nature of the mind. So that's what's being said here, is that we need to study, get a framework, we need to meditate, and then if we really want to take that further, we need to make sure we have some shamatha, and then on that basis, then we can really eliminate mental afflictions and suffering and achieve liberation. Sounds easy, huh?
Tomorrow?
Yeah, but well, by tomorrow, yeah, we want to get there by the end of tomorrow. Maybe not. Maybe take a little bit longer. Any last questions before we break for lunch there?
About the union of
Shamatha vipassana.
I never thought how it went until you said now, and it made sense. Actually, it's a realization. So how come one gets the union of the two on the path of preparation and not the path of seeing? If it's realization, it should be together.
And it is, because realization, I didn't put that in there, but realization can be,
Impermanence.
it can be conceptual or direct.
Ah,
So I didn't want to add too much detail here, but that's the sort of answer, yeah. So on path of preparation, it's conceptual, but it's a realization. But they're unified, because they have to be a realization. And we're realizing on path of preparation, but it's just like conceptual realization. And if we get time again, I'll explain that in the Mahayana path chart there tomorrow.
I can get the union of it before, like the last point.
The union, that's what marks the entry point to path of preparation, is the unification. Before that, they're not unified.
Unless they have realization.
Well, then they're in the path of preparation. As soon as you unify them, you're in the path of preparation. That's what marks the entry point to the path of preparation. But we'll look at that tomorrow in that chart if we get time tomorrow afternoon. Yeah, last question in the break.
Regarding the perceptions of the self,
Mm-hmm.
so the second one, the unchanging, unitary, and independent,
Mm-hmm.
is this what, like in the yogic tradition, called as Purusha?
Purusha just means person, doesn't it? I mean, the word Sanskrit word that Purusha, and certainly here we use, it just means person, I think. But I mean, maybe they're using it in a different way. But Purusha, I think, is the Sanskrit term that often in here is just translated as person. But maybe there's some other connotation to that word, so I don't know.
Does the Buddha, like, somewhere refers to this point more specifically?
To what, sorry?
To this point of self.
Yeah, so that unchanging unitary independent is brought in there because at the time of the Buddha there were a number of traditions that were saying that that was the characteristics of the self that moves from life to life and achieved liberation. So he sort of refuted that. But again, I think that's not something normally we would instinctively have, that false sense of self, but certainly the last two we do. Okay, let's break there, and we've got, I think, 1 hour for lunch. Come back at 2 o'clock, and then we'll continue on in the text.